I am recording this and I forgot to start that at the beginning. So thanks for the message, Vic. Yeah, so this daily process is really the same thing as what Joe was just talking about, the backcountry checklist. It's just instead of 5 steps, there's 7 steps, but it's the same steps. It's the same things that we all do in terms of getting the avalanche forecast, planning our trip, making sure we check our gear and do the appropriate checks at the trailhead, that it's all in working condition. When we get out in the field, and even before we get out in the field, we want to verify that conditions are, kind of as we expected, maybe when we were planning our trip, or maybe they're different. And so then we may have to adjust our plan based on, this back and forth. So even though it's somewhat chronological, and that these steps here that are in green generally happen beforehand, the blue steps happen during, and the reflecting takes place after. Sometimes you move back and forth between steps to adjust your plan. Using good travel habits is one of the ways that we minimize our risk when we're out there. And then we kind of differentiate between the sort of large scale planning of where we're going to go in terms of terrain in step 2, and a little bit more small scale, the way that we evaluate slopes. And so that's just the way that, these steps are broken down here in Canada. So now we're going to take advantage of your knowledge and expertise, and we're going to ask those of you that want prizes, or maybe if you don't want prizes, you still want to participate. What is the most important lesson that you've learned through your avalanche training? And it doesn't have to be a 3-page thesis, just a few bullet points, or a paragraph, or a couple sentences, or just a few words is all fine. And you can put that into the chat box. So we'll just give you a minute here, so people have an opportunity to do that. As you're typing, you might see some of the answers coming in. Nice. Coming in so fast and furious.
That's great. These are really good.
Yeah, these are really good. And, as avalanche educators, sure, this is a free webinar, and Joe and I are obviously putting our time into this, as well as, people like Vic and Sage helping us, but we're also selfish. And I can see that afterward, when we go through these chat, that we're going to really take a lot of fantastic information from you. That's going to influence, our ability to teach going forward. So that's great. All right, we'll keep those coming.
Wow.
Oopsie, let's get rid of that. Okay, so one of the things that we have to manage is the avalanche forecast. And if you look at these 2 maps, and unfortunately Avalanche.org didn't include Alaska, but if you're in the mountainous part of the Columbia Mountains, you've got a pretty good chance that there's going to be an avalanche forecast that covers your region. Likewise, the area on the coast around Vancouver, and they're starting to expand. You might have seen some news stories about Avalanche Canada securing some additional funding here and there, and they put that right back into generally avalanche forecasts, so that places like Vancouver Island are going to be getting a forecast this year. And yeah, so it's just to try to make that better. Over here in the US side of it, you can see that there's, the main areas that people backcountry ski get forecasts, but there's lots of other places. I mean, look at Nevada, there's some good skiing there, but there's not a single avalanche forecast. And Joe was mentioning in Alaska, they deal with the same challenges. So we're going to spend a little bit of time here talking about what we can do when either one, we don't have a forecast, or maybe the weather has changed significantly compared to what was forecast. And so we want to try to verify whether that avalanche forecast is even correct or not. So Joe's going to do the next slide.
Yeah, this is, I've been thinking a lot about these trips into remote areas in Alaska, particularly. That's where, because I'm going out there the most, remote in terms of no avalanche forecast. So it's kind of like you're going out there with very little information. So a year ago, I kind of came up with this framework after talking to a lot of avalanche professionals and avalanche forecasters and stuff. So it's this kind of framework of the trip. So it takes a lot of preparation to go into these remote areas. So a lot of training in the years before, taking your avalanche courses, getting out there, a lot of experience and practicing. And then in the months and weeks and days before the trip, you're planning your trip. You're actually figuring out where exactly you're going to go, what the possible conditions may be like from as best you can, because anywhere in the world you can find out something about the snow. Even the most remote places in the planet, you can find out something. There's pilots going out there. There's weather models, so you can find out some idea. So you're trying to anticipate what kind of avalanche types might be out there, how much snow is out there, maybe what the avalanche danger is like. So this is kind of forecasting on your own. And then when you're going out, when you finally do get out there into these areas, you're actually being the avalanche forecaster. So it's this cycle, this ongoing cycle in this remote area where you're observing conditions, actually getting your hands on the snow and looking around and feeling it and digging into it. And then you're creating a forecast from that. So this is just the process, like what forecasters do. But if you have no avalanche forecaster, you have to do it yourself. So you're figuring out the size and likelihood of potential avalanches, the danger, what the problems are, and building route options based on those things. And then you're adding that, so you decide on what routes you're going to go onto, and then you're adding this additional layer of safety, these margins for safety, which are also called your travel techniques. Spreading out, stopping a safe zone, turning around. That's my favorite one. If things don't feel right, just turning around. I practice that all the time. Back off and go to plan B. Starting small, like when you get out to these areas, you have little information about starting with small terrain. And then if conditions allow, then you work up to bigger and bigger terrain, only if everything works out. And then it's an ongoing cycle out there. You're just continually forecasting, looking at conditions. But so this is that's what 99% of Alaska is, and probably actually a lot of Canadian mountains. There's nobody out there looking at the snowpack because there's a lot of remote mountains out there in Canada. But around Anchorage, we're lucky to have a couple great avalanche centers. We have the Chugach National Forest Avalanche Information Center based in Girdwood, and they forecast for the main area at Turnagain Pass in that area. And they're just an incredible group of super knowledgeable people. And then we also have the Hatcher Pass Avalanche Center, which is more volunteer based, but they're highly knowledgeable people. So those are some great resources. So where most of the people are going, where the biggest groups are around Alaska, there are forecasts. And there's also some other smaller organizations like in Valdez and Cordova and around Haines that also do some forecasting.
I really like what's written there in the middle of this circle, which is to embrace uncertainty. And our brains don't like uncertainty.
No.
I don't like it in the avalanche world, and I don't like it in my own life in general.
Yeah, it kind of
And
goes against our human nature
it
to
does,
uncertainty.
right?
It's like I gotta fight that uncertainty
Got to
and
fight it.
crush it down and everything
Yeah.
like that. But
Yeah. Figure it
unfortunately,
out.
Unfortunately, it works better if you just like give it a big old hug and go
Yeah.
along within the backcountry.
Man, yeah, and that's so true. I mean, I think in life too, but especially in terms of the avalanche world, there's no way that we're ever going to be certain about things out there, and so it's really a matter of understanding the parts that we're not certain about, and then once we can really, as Joe was saying, make friends with it. That in a realistic way, that can help us to make decisions, because it's all calculated decisions about choosing the terrain that's appropriate for the conditions, and we can, I often say to students, we can do this in a way that we can bring the risk down to a level that is quite reasonable. And if I think about it in terms of the other thing that I typically do on days that I go backcountry skiing, unless I'm already at a backcountry lodge, which is the best situation typically. But typically I have to get in my car and do winter driving to get to a trailhead. And I think that if we do a good job with this systematic approach, we can bring the risk down to a level that the riskiest part of the day is driving to the trailhead. And
yeah, that's true. Yeah, that is really true. It's like calculating the risk. Trying to figure out what the real risk out there is, and you can make this calculation and figure it all out. But then at the end point, it's like, well, there's this uncertainty. So you figure the avalanche danger is here, but then you don't really know. So you got to sort of just like notch it back to account for that uncertainty.
That's right.
Out there, because it's like you will never know 100%. So making 100% calculation of the risk is impossible. So that's the reason to always notch it back, because you just don't know 100%, which is kind of what's kept Keith and I interested in this avalanche thing for many decades.
Yeah, that's for sure.
If I knew, I'd like kind of be like, oh, maybe I should pick up a different hobby.
Yeah. Hey, there's something appealing about it. And I think that a lot of folks, obviously enjoy skiing in general, but there's something about getting together with a group of people and, having to make decisions to keep ourselves and our friends safe. That's pretty real. So on the Avalanche Canada side, there's something called the Dangerator that was developed a couple of years ago, and it helps to deal with this issue of going to areas where there's no avalanche forecast available. And so I'm not going to go into great depth talking about it now, because we've got some other things to discuss, but this is a way to, kind of systematically do what the forecasters do. It was actually designed by avalanche forecasters here in Canada. So there's nothing sort of sneaky or secret about it. It's like it's actually their secret recipe for, how they come up with forecasts. And obviously, they don't just look at the factors that are here: critical loading, critical warming, recent loading, slab avalanches, persistent slab problems. But, that's kind of the backbone of how they make decisions. So,
yeah, this Dangerator was a real, amazing thing. When I saw it, it was just like it said so much to me, because I'm always going to these remote areas, and just be able to start with considerable. That mentality of you're going into a remote area, you're starting with considerable, and it's like, oh, that's just great. I can just say
Mhm.
that before you're getting in the airplane to go
It's a
fly in the
starting
middle.
place.
Yeah, I'm just telling people it's considerable. Human triggered avalanches are likely. That's like the real deal there. So it means like we're going out there, we're not even getting on avalanche terrain our first day, and we may not the rest of the trip. But if if you go through these steps, you may be able to get into some more higher exposure terrain, or you may not. But you're starting with that mentality of considerable. So this is a real, very good mindset for going into the remote areas with.
I like to use this as well when I'm teaching AST2 because it's a way to double check. One of the steps of the daily process is verify conditions. And this is a really good way to do it. This is what you're verifying, and if one of these things is changing, then we may have to adjust our mindset about the avalanche danger as well.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, so the steps of the daily process, and really Joe's steps as well, are the same. Planning your trip. We have a tool here in Canada called the Evaluator Trip Planner, and this is, even though it's fairly basic, it's super powerful in terms of driving us into choosing the right terrain based on those conditions. That's really what it comes down to. And you can say, oh, well, there's so much more to it than that. And there is, but we have to have like a starting point. We have to have sort of a core to, make sure that those human factors, the human decision making, doesn't end us putting us into a place where it's a lot more dangerous than we should be. And the 8th scale is that's what you see here. Whoops, I'm just going to go back a second. That's the scale here: simple, challenging, complex, and then these are the danger ratings that come from the Avalanche Bulletin. And so, what are these ratings mean? Simple, challenging, complex, and they're pretty straightforward. There's just 3 of them. Simple terrain is typically non-avalanche terrain, although it might have some small avalanche slopes, kind of like this one here, just below the skier. You can see that that's over 30 degrees. It looks like it, but it's a pretty small slope. Whereas most of the terrain you see here is in the 20 to 25 degree realm. And so that's what makes that simple. And then over here, we've got challenging terrain, which is typically a mix of avalanche and non-avalanche terrain. And you can see that in this photo, even within here, you've got pretty good forest density here to prevent large scale avalanches, but here there's a nice big opening. And so, of course, this would be avalanche terrain. If you look at the top here, same thing, up on these larger slopes that are more open, they're steeper, avalanche terrain, but then you get further down here, there's some more protected and lower angle. So it's a mix of the two. And then the final 8's rating is for complex terrain. And that's the place where you really want to be quite confident about the avalanche danger being relatively low, maybe moderate, because here you're going to be exposed to a lot of avalanche terrain, not only where you're traveling, but potentially above you. And so we generally save complex terrain for the safest travel conditions.
Yeah, the 8 scale is, I think, gaining more popularity, is gaining momentum in the U.S. because the U.S. really needs something like this, and there's been a lot of money, a lot of research put into this avalanche terrain exposure scale. So with the Alaska Guide Collective, we're going to start using it this winter, and
cool.
I think they're starting to map some of the most popular backcountry ski areas around Anchorage with 8's rating. So that's really exciting, and I think the rest of the U.S. will start inching towards that, because right now it's pretty vague how we talk about terrain classifications and terrain scales.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's challenging. So you don't have to necessarily answer in the chat box. We don't want to clog that up because we're going to have another question coming up. But I just give you guys a moment to pause and look at this picture, and think about what kind of terrain is that? Is it simple terrain? Is it challenging terrain? Is it complex terrain? And as we move further into our avalanche education and the nuanced aspects of it, we can even kind of pick out micro portions of the terrain. So you might say, okay, well, overall, this would be, hopefully you've thought about it, this would be a good example of challenging terrain because it's a combination of avalanche terrain, all this stuff here, and non-avalanche terrain. That's kind of non-avalanche terrain. The lower portions of the slopes here are non-avalanche terrain. But then you can start to break it down into smaller pieces of terrain, like what's this here? Okay, well, again, it's maybe a little bit difficult because it's just a picture, but to me, this looks like terrain that's over 30 degrees. And certainly the trees are open enough that you could get some avalanches here. There's actually a little bit of evidence here of some loose snow moving down. This slope over here looks like a pretty big slope, right? And so, if you were to just say in terms of this feature right here, this would be creeping into what I would call complex terrain because, it's a big slope and there's really very few places that would be safe within a slope like this, as opposed to, the terrain over here is more kind of in that challenging realm because there's some lower angle stuff and there's some steeper stuff. The slopes aren't as big. So again, as we get into, the more advanced side of avalanche education, that kind of go from the larger scale to really analyzing more of this micro terrain, because a lot of times the difference between surviving and not surviving if an avalanche happens is exactly where you are in the terrain. If an avalanche happens and you're up here on higher ground on the ridge, you're much more likely to survive than if you're kind of down here in the more exposed and area where the snow can really build up around you. So here's another picture. And again, just want you to think about this concept of simple, challenging, complex terrain. And, if you think simple is mostly non-avalanche terrain, challenging is a mix, complex is mostly avalanche terrain. You're guessing out there. And some of you might think, well, it kind of looks like a mix of the two. But when you really look at the picture carefully, you might notice that the terrain here is not quite over 30 degrees. It's really more in the low to mid 20s. And this is the kind of terrain that I like to describe as hip pocket or back pocket terrain, because it's places that you kind of keep in your pocket or you keep in your mind for almost any day of the winter. You can safely ride here without the risk of avalanches because the terrain is shallow enough. And sometimes I also say it's God's gift because it's still really, I mean, this guy is, getting face shots and it looks like great skiing. And so we have places that we can go that are, safe most of the time. And that's kind of what simple terrain typically is. And so that would be, this is a good example of simple terrain.
Yeah, I really agree with that. The importance of just, going for simple terrain, because it's like there's so much emphasis on more extreme terrain and really steep terrain, and like that's the only cool thing to do, and that's what everybody's doing, but the reality is this almost non-avalanche terrain can provide incredible skiing, and you always can go to that, and you're going to be having a good time skiing great powder.
Mm-hmm.
being in the mountains. It doesn't have to be gnarly.
And, depending on what part of the world you do your backcountry skiing, one of the things that's cool about the Columbia mountain range is that we have to be really nimble. There's days when, we got to stick to terrain like this if we want to have a long backcountry career. But then there are times in the season when the stability improves to the point where going into terrain like this is a reasonable choice. And so, since we've been talking about simple, challenging, complex, again, hopefully you look at a picture like this and you go, yeah, I'd say that's probably more complex terrain. So, it's got big slopes and all of these areas here that are open because big avalanches run through there. Now, even within this picture, though, there are places that are more and less dangerous. And so, being out in the midst of this big slope is much more exposed than, say, choosing to find some protection in the trees through here. So there's just so much to think about, but we can use these tools to help us in a very basic way, and in generally a quite safe way, choose the right terrain based on the avalanche danger. And that's what, this system that's been developed in the last 15 years here in Canada is all about. And there's even places like here, this is up at Kootenay Pass, where they're at the trailhead, they've got a sign that shows you within the terrain, what's simple, what's challenging, what's complex, and then how to apply that to, what's the avalanche danger rating today. And then that should help you to make a decision as to whether it's appropriate to go simple, challenging, complex, choosing the right terrain for the conditions. Cool. All right, I think we got another question here. So the next question that we'd like for you to answer in the chat box is, how do you manage your group's decision-making when the riding is exceptionally good? Face shots every third turn. And I think what we're getting at here is that it can be very tempting in these kinds of exceptionally good conditions to want to ride in steeper terrain because sometimes the snow is so deep, it really needs a little bit extra gravity to help you make good turns. So how do you manage your group's decision making? Well, let's see some answers in the chat box. Thanks, Sage, for pointing out to where we are in time. We'll keep things rolling. Yeah. Nice comment there from my buddy Matt Crane. All right, well, keep those answers coming in. We'll look at them more thoroughly. In terms of gear, just wanted to talk briefly about some things that came up last season where, I mean, we all know that there can be interference between our avalanche beacons and electronic devices. Actually, anything metallic. Supposedly, if you took like I don't know if anybody still eats power bars, but they're like an energy bar that's wrapped in kind of a metallic foil. And even something like that, I guess, can interfere with the signal. But the main culprit, of course, is our phones. And so they talk about this 20 centimeter, 50 centimeter. So just want to bring that up briefly. When the avalanche beacon is sending a signal, you want to make sure that your electronics are at least 20 centimeters away. And if someone is buried and you're going into search, then the electronic interference is even more sensitive when you go into search mode on your transceiver. And so at that point, anything electronic that is within 50 centimeters of your transceiver as you're trying to search can interfere with it. My buddy had a new beacon and we were testing it out, and his range was jumping all over the place. And we realized eventually that his phone was within 50 centimeters of his beacon. There was an avalanche situation last year where there's speculation that the interference got in the way of the search and influence the outcome. So it's not anything totally new, but it's just we've had some really good reminders that we want to pay attention to that. Now it's difficult because if you wear your avalanche transceiver on the harness, it typically sits here. And so if your phone is in a pocket here or even down here, it can certainly get in the way. And so I don't have an answer. Personally, I actually like wearing my transceiver down in a pant pocket that's designed for the transceiver, and it kind of keeps it in there quite securely. And then that way I feel like with between the pants pocket and an upper pocket here, I've got enough separation. But
yeah, I'd agree with that. Yeah, I keep mine in my pants pocket, and then my phone up here, so I have it available for maps or taking a photo or whatever. And it's also warm into there. I've also seen this problem with people with electric heated gloves, and trying to do a search with those doesn't work at all.
Oh no.
Yeah. What about watches? What is there? Because those are people always have those on their wrists. Have you heard anything about those?
You know, I think that they're still figuring out what can interfere, and I think the answer right now is anything that's electronic.
Yeah, it sounds like the new iPhone 12 sound real, even, I guess they have huge magnets in them or something like that.
Okay.
They're even worse than the previous ones.
Previous versions, yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, as long as we're aware of it, you know, we can
we keep our phones we put them in airplane mode in the backcountry just so we can stay focused on the backcountry. But even if they're off, you still have to keep them away from your beacon.
Yeah. I used to think that, you know, airplane mode would solve this, but it doesn't necessarily.
Yeah.
There's actually, I saw an article about there's certain kinds of protective pouches that you can buy, and that keep all the electronic signals from moving out beyond the pouch. And I don't know much about them, but I have heard about them.
Yeah, I've seen those also. I think the best idea is just to keep them separated.
Keep them separated.
Yeah, no matter what you're doing.
Yeah. And again, you know, these are the things that Joe talked about earlier in terms of, you know, what are the things that, you know, we want to check out when we're out in the backcountry. And, you know, obviously we're looking for new amounts of snow or rain, of course. How much is the wind moving the snow? How much is the temperature potentially playing a role in the stability or instability of the snowpack? And what kinds of signals do we see out there that might give us clues about what's going on? You know, seeing a big avalanche like this is a very significant signal that, wow, there's some real instability in the snowpack, and it's not a shallow one here, so potentially very destructive avalanches. And then, you know, the other thing, whether you're in the US or Canada, all of these concepts are agreed on as ways to travel and reduce our risk. It doesn't guarantee that we're going to be safe, but it prevents accidents from happening. Having good communication, making sure where we group is out of avalanche paths. When we do have to cross exposed terrain, if the conditions are right, we decrease our risk by spreading out, going one at a time, making the terrain work in our favor. So if you see in this picture here, we have choices about where to travel, and it's a lot smarter to stay up on higher ground here, where an avalanche is much less likely to bury you deeply as compared to in these big gully features where any sort of avalanche is probably going to bury you quite deep. So just thinking about those kinds of things when you're choosing terrain can really reduce your risk and still give you, good skiing, good objectives. You get to the same place. Looking, when you're out there, right, for instability. And that's a tricky one, right? Because in this case, they did find an instability, but it's easier to find instabilities where in the shallower part of the snowpack, one of the big killers of people in terms of avalanches are deeper layers. We call them persistent weak layers. And oftentimes they don't give us many clues. And so that makes it really tricky. And so that's where the avalanche bulletin comes in, or being our own forecaster by having to do our own investigations. And then the last one here just has to do with, thinking about when I enter an avalanche slope, before I enter it, I've already thought about where I'm going to go if anything goes wrong. Like I want an escape route because that's going to give me the ability to be able to act fast if something does go wrong.
I really like this, the travel habits, just making these things all habitual, because these extra, these travel habits or these margins of safety are what are going to save your hide in the long run. Just try to make them habitual. Just always do these. Don't well, maybe this time we'll do it, maybe that time we'll do it. Just kind of always do it and make it a habit, like putting on your seatbelt or something like that.
Yeah, good point. And then wanted to bring up this idea of positive human behaviors. I won't go into too much depth here, this whole topic of what has been called human factors for many years. And that was made popular starting in the 90s. And it was looking at the connection between human behaviors and avalanche accidents and seeing where we made mistakes. And there's been a shift in terms of avalanche education over the last few years, where we're trying to shift more from, what not to do to what to do. And it seems like from a psychological perspective that it has more of an impact on people's behavior by kind of talking more about the positive things that we can do, things like making sure we have good communication within a group. And that's easier said than done. I find that sometimes I'm out and it's like, our communication is not really that good today. And, being aware of it and, maybe you can work on it, find ways to improve it. Leadership is not just about, hey, follow me. It's about people that help a group to come to good decision making. And so leadership is often asking someone else what they think. That's a good sign of leadership. Having patience. If you're going to be in the avalanche world for a long time and you want to spend time in avalanche terrain, patience is something that it may be difficult, but it's necessary because the conditions aren't always right for skiing the same slopes every day. And so we have to be able to adjust and sometimes wait. Sometimes we have to wait a few days, sometimes we have to wait a few weeks, and sometimes even as long as a few months before the conditions improve enough to feel like, okay, now's the time to hit that slope.
Right. Yeah, you're on the the mountain schedule, not
Yeah.
not on your schedule, not in your schedule.
Which is tough, right? Because,
Yeah.
people plan their ski
We got the
trips
weekend and
and they want to, they have certain objectives and, but that often, doesn't work out well. So yeah, having the discipline to be able to follow some sort of process that, like Joe and I have been talking about here tonight, whether it's the steps that he introduced through the Guide Collective or the steps of the daily process, it doesn't matter as long as it's some sort of system for making decisions rather than kind of going, well, let's just go skiing. I don't want to worry about that stuff. And I mean, if you don't want to worry about that stuff, I just quick point. I have students that have taken my courses and they're like, we really are interested in this and we like learning about it. But you know what? We just go skiing in simple terrain all the time because we don't want to have to get into the more, kind of complicated decision making. We're totally happy skiing that. It's great terrain. We know the spots and yeah, so that's cool too. Right on. Yeah, and the sixth step is, as I mentioned before, getting into some of the more nitty gritty, thinking about the angles of slopes, thinking about the avalanche problems that are written in the forecast, thinking about the forest density or other types of anchors. These are all the things that kind of combine together to affect how likely it is that avalanches are going to happen. Likewise, there's other factors in the terrain that really impact the consequences if you do get in an avalanche. So the size of the slope, you can see here that there was an avalanche triggered, but it's a super small avalanche. This person, may or may not have even realized that an avalanche got triggered. Whereas here, if you triggered this avalanche, oh, well, you will realize it, that's for sure. And the chance of surviving an avalanche in this terrain is really, really low because of the consequences of that terrain. Likewise, we think about consequences in terms of what we call terrain traps. Where are you going to end up? Are you going to end up in a place where the avalanche debris spreads out? Or are you going to end up in a place where all the snow is going to accumulate and bury you deep? So those are the kinds of things that we need to pay attention to. And
yeah,
finally,
I really like that. One more comment on that. Evaluate slopes. I really like that point, and I've been thinking a lot about that this past year or so. And in terms of evaluating slopes, so even if you have an avalanche forecast, the avalanche forecast it's for a whole region. It's for a big area. Many slopes like. But when you go on to an individual slope, if they say the regional avalanche danger is moderate, you go onto one slope and that slope may be moderate, it may be low danger, or maybe considerable. Mm-hmm. So when you're going from a regional scale down to a slope scale, you have to evaluate each slope independently. So that's a really, that's a great point. I think about that a lot, and that's why we take these avalanche classes and stuff to learn how to evaluate each slope on your own.
Yeah, nice one. Oh, okay. So the next question is, what was the hardest decision you had to make in the backcountry, and how would you do it differently now? Let's see what we get in the chat box. And thank you, Sage, for helping us stay on track. We are going to leave a little bit of time at the end for questions. We appreciate the humor that's out there as well, because it helps us to one, stay focused, and also to not allow our brains to get complacent. Yeah, turning around is it's always a tough decision, but in retrospect, it often feels good. I really can't think of a. Can you think of a situation, Joe, where you ever turned around and regretted it?
Oh, like every time I turn around, I mean, I'm doing it less now, but I used to anguish over it and anguish and anguish.
Anguish, yeah,
And now it's just like, one year I was trying to turn around more. I was trying to make it my goal to turn around.
yeah,
So it kind of shifted my attitude now. So now I think it's like every time I turn around, I feel good about it. I get to have an extra
yeah.
beer at the end of the day, and I try to, it's almost making my goal to turn around at least once every day,
Uh-huh.
just to be like, okay, I got to I'm searching for reasons to turn around. So it's like, I'm going to give that a try and just always ready to kick, turn, and turn around and not do
Yeah.
it. So
Huh.
kind of made it part of my my daily
Yeah.
habit is to turn around.
Yeah.
So like you said once, to keep those neural pathways working. You got to practice it to keep them working so you're ready to do it. And that's why I
Yeah.
practice turning around so much.
Yeah. 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 And it's a really good way to look at it, is that even if you don't need to turn around, by turning around, you're getting practice doing it, so that when you really do need to do it,
Yeah.
it's not like a new thing.
Yeah, it's like the muscle memory and
Yeah,
keeping those
exactly.
muscles sharp. So it's like they're ready to be used, the turning around muscle.
Yeah, the turning around muscle.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because when I was younger, it was like for sure I didn't exercise that muscle a lot. It was real weak.
Yeah. Yeah, right. All right. Well, let's see where we're at here. Just, a couple examples here of how, we use these systems to choose the right terrain. And here's an example of high danger. And you look at the trip planner and you can see here that high danger, most of the avalanche terrain is not recommended. But we can go into simple terrain with obviously a bit of extra caution, because high danger is means that we're going to get natural avalanches probably happening. We need to be very aware of what's above us. But terrain like this is relatively safe. This is here in the Rossland range. There's just nothing in this terrain you can see, or I can kind of tell you as well, that is over really 25 degrees, and so it's a great place to go. Now, that being said, if you move off of this picture about I'd say 800 meters to the west, well, there's some really significant avalanche terrain. So so one of the things I think about, and this is a great bluebird day, we've got good visibility. And we feel pretty comfortable going to terrain like this. However, if this was a really foggy day and it was high danger, and we weren't like 100% confident in our route finding through this, it would be a lot more dangerous, because we could easily find ourselves maybe in the wrong spot. So a few other things here. I think we'll get just to this last slide here. And Joe and I just wanted to talk a little bit about, where we see avalanche education possibly going down the road. You want to take a stab at that first, Joe?
Oh yeah. Well, it's amazing. I'm sure it's the same in Canada, but the popularity of these avalanche courses has gone through the roof starting last year. I mean, it's just like, I think every avalanche course in the United States has been up in the last year, and this year was full by November. So people are just mad about it. So it's great that people are taking avalanche courses, but like Keith and I were talking about, it's really a two-part course, and the Rec 1 or the AST 1 is just part one. And it's, really important to keep that avalanche education going, because, our knowledge will get rusty. New research comes out. All this avalanche stuff it's changing all the time, and people are learning more, and The research is going on that's being trickling down to us backcountry recreational backcountry skiers. So it's important to keep up on that, and also just to practice. I mean, that's how you get better, is by practice. You know, it's hard, deliberate practice, and taking avalanche courses, practicing your rescue. You know, maybe sacrificing a weekend with your buddies and taking another avalanche course, or refresher avalanche course. So we really encourage people to take both part 1 and part 2. Yeah.
Yeah, I've had discussions with various groups. I was working up in the Bugaboos this past summer, and lots of backcountry skiers came through, and yeah, they had some interesting answers around, you know, why it's hard to take the AST2. I think there's just some conception out there that, one, it's you know, it's not going to be fun, or they're not going to get much skiing in. I make sure that we, you know, because this is my life too. I
Want to go
make sure
skiing?
we're going to go skiing, right? Joe came
Yeah,
down.
for sure.
We did an AST2 together, and I remember Joe. I mean, it was really cool because we had some you know, lovely conditions down here, and Joe hadn't skied that much down in this area. We came off of one of our runs, and Joe was like, just huge eyes, going, "I think that was like the best tree run of my life."
Yeah, yeah,
And that was in
yeah,
a
definitely.
course.
Yeah, really, yeah, amazing tree. Yeah, we don't have tree skiing at home, so I definitely appreciate the trees down there. One of the things we're really at home, we're really emphasizing on this recreational level 2 is that it's, you know, being your own forecaster, because, you know, in Alaska, a lot of people come to Alaska or live there, you know, stay there their whole life because it's the, you know, the land of adventure, and they want to go off and have these big adventures in these remote areas. And those are areas without an avalanche forecast. And if you're going to an area without an avalanche forecaster, professional forecast, you are the forecaster. So you got to know how to avalanche forecast. So that's what we're really honing in on, which is a little bit different than the lower 40. I think they're a little bit more still tuned on recreational level 2, being a little bit forecast centric, but we're going for these remote areas, like you're flying into remote Alaska, or just, you know, slogging weeks through the Alaska wilderness. So that's a big attribute we really promote in our courses.
Nice. Yeah, I just wanted to mention that something new that I started this year is that besides the regular AST1 and AST2, is on the lodge. I've been teaching lodge-based AST2 courses for, I don't know, I saw Norm was on here. He was on one of the first ones. And Norm, I think that was like, you know, it was well over 10 years ago now, I believe. And but one of the things that we started doing this year, and it's been so exciting, is we've been meeting monthly with that same group that's going to go into the Backcountry Lodge in February. And we're, you know, discussing all of these topics. You know, this is an example of a map that the students are working on, and they're you know, kind of divided up into 4 different groups of 2 or 3, and they're trying to really zone in on the map to do some trip planning, so that when they, just like Joe was talking about, you know, when you spend time before you get out there, and then you start to really learn about the terrain, and you know, as well as many other aspects of avalanche education. And so instead of it being, you know, like over 2 days or over 4 days or even over 8 days, it's spread out over 6 months. And so I'm so excited about it. One, because I'm enjoying the group, and we get together, and it wasn't really practical before we had some of this technology available to us. It's allowing us to bring a webinar like this to you. You know, we've got people from all over, I guess even, you know, outside of Canada and the US. So we've got people from all over the world participating. And so we can do these kinds of things, and that's what the AST2++ is about. I'm trying to figure out ways to bring it into maybe just my regular AST2 courses, if I can get people to sign up early enough, we can start meeting and just get this going over a longer time period. Because yeah, it just feels like that's really going to be a game changer in terms of people embracing this stuff and making it a part of their own decision making. Well, that is, I think, pretty much it. We'll do one more chat poll, and we kind of answered how we think Avalanche education might change in the future. And we wanted to ask you to put in the chat box, when you think in a really creative way, if you can, at this time of evening, what do you think might change or could really make a difference in terms of staying safe in avalanche terrain, looking ahead into the future, roughly 25 years. What kinds of things might make that different or easier? Or I just thought of a horrible thing, which is, yeah, climate change, make it easier because there won't be as much snow and it'll be warmer. But yeah, see, somebody even mentioned that. All right, I'm not the only one that's, but yeah. Yeah, automated tools, AI digital twins, nice. LiDAR, yeah. I mean, really, when we think about how much it's changed in the last 25 years, it's certainly not outrageous to think that it could change significantly in the next 25 years. Wow, right, yeah. Huh, right. Huh, interesting. This is great. All right, we'll keep those rolling in. And I think we're going to try to get to maybe a few questions. And Vic and Sage, feel free to unmute yourselves, start videos too, if you like, and maybe you can help direct us to if we have any questions out there.
Yeah, Keith, this is Vic. There was something on one of Joe's slides early on talking about the DBEST beacon protocol. And so I managed to do a little research in the background. I guess that's more of a US option, and I provided a link in the answers here. I don't know if everyone sees that answer or whether it was just the person who asked it.
Yeah, that's my business partner Nick D'Alessio came up with that, and it's been in, sounds like it's being fully embraced in the lower 48. It stands for display, batteries, electronics, search, and transmit. It's just like a simple check that you do on your beacon every morning, and it just has a nice acronym that rhymes with Nick's last name.
Oh,
yeah, D'Alessio de Best.
Oh, cool. Neat.
Yeah.
Do you want to take a stab at, I just opened up the Q&A and I see, do you have that in front of you, Joe? Faye asked a question about how often do you recommend replacing a beacon?
Oh, let's see. How often do I recommend it? Well, I doing, these regular tests every year. I mean, every time at the trailhead, and then range checks throughout the year. So that's a good way of testing to see if you need a new beacon. And then, if new technology comes out that's better, definitely get a new beacon. They're just little computers, and how long do little computers last? Not very long. So, one of the main, so I say like a max of 10 years, and definitely everybody should definitely have a 3 antenna beacon and nothing older than 10 years. So
yeah, and probably somewhere around 5 is the point where it's like,
yeah,
okay, is it worth getting a new beacon? Wow, technology's changed so much. I'm thinking of like a lot of people have the BCA beacons, the tracker, and so I think everyone agrees at this point that the old analog beacons, get rid of you will keep them for practice. They're really good for hiding. when you're doing companion rescue practice, but have a digital beacon. And I think the first generation, like Tracker 1 or Tracker ATS, it was just the first generation, and so the range on those is really limited. It's kind of scary. So I would say that you want that 3 antenna. The Tracker ATS only has 2. That's kind of the standard.
Yeah, we all switched to these mood beacons last year just because of the range. That range, it's starting to seem like a big deal to me. So we all switched over to those. I mean, there's pros and cons to all these beacons, but we were just like kind of thinking, oh, we'll try something different and try these ones with much better range.
Andres had a question about the AITS rating, and the AITS ratings are available for certain locations in BC, but certainly as you go into the States and even places like the Rossland range, it's not mapped out. I think that the skills that we teach, especially in the AST2 course, help people to be able to make their own AITS ratings. That's a pretty big focus there. And I don't know. What would you say, Joe?
Oh, sorry. I was reading a comment here. I missed that last little bit you said.
Yeah, just, like you guys don't have AITS ratings printed anywhere for the places you go. So,
right.
What do you recommend for recreational skiers that kind of want to be able to choose simple, challenging, complex?
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, I mean, they're starting to, sounds like the forecasters are working on the AITS maps for around our area.
Oh.
But, one of these really handy things that, it's kind of along that line are like these slope angle layer on your Gaia GPS.
Right.
That's kind of almost become like a norm. And it just came out for the main Turnigan Pass near us this last year. And it's just a game changer having that slope angle on your phone. And so you can see things really, really well.
Yeah. And I like looking, because my, eyesight isn't as good as it was, I like looking at those on the computer before I go out, because then I can really, see more of how the slope angles change in different zones, and it helps me to plan my trip. So that's a really good point. I mean, it's not that that's the only way to decide whether terrain is simple, challenging, or complex, but it's a really amazing colored visual. If it's like mostly all orange and red, well, that to me sounds like complex terrain. And if it's, a bit of a mix of everything, that's challenging terrain. And if it's mostly, not colored, so below 30 degrees, then then it's probably more simple. So
it's a real handy tool to have in your pocket, that on the phone. That's the main thing I use the phone for in the backcountry, is to look at slope angles for areas that I don't know.
Yeah. Awesome. Any other questions? Seems like we kind of tackled the big ones. Biggest advance. I mean, I guess
this is Vic.
Hey, Vic.
Kelvin was just asking if there are any other additional Avi websites that you'd like to recommend for folks.
That's a good question. I mean, I guess I think more of the tools that we use, things like Gaia and that sort of thing. But I mean, Avalanche Canada, and thanks, Kelvin, for bringing that up, because I'd probably be remiss. Avalanche Canada has done some amazing stuff with their website. It was kind of archaic a couple of years ago, but they, through some of the funding that's come through, they've been able to update things. And there's a really good online tutorial on the Avalanche Canada website called Avi Savvy. And wow, it's really cool. And you can, there's stuff on it where you can, do your own route finding with your mouse, and, it'll tell you, like that wasn't a good choice. And it's fun. It's almost like a video game, and but way more extensive than just what I'm describing. So, yeah. And Eugene asked about, the biggest advance. Okay, can we pat ourselves on the back, Joe? Like, I mean, I think there's a lot of factors that have contributed to the flattening of the fatality curve, because there was definitely a curve in the 80s and 90s as backcountry use was increasing and the number of fatalities was also increasing. But then somehow over the last 20 years,
surely Avalanche Education, 100% Avalanche Education.
well, yeah.
Really good Avalanche instructors.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think we can pat ourselves on the back.
Yeah,
that's been
it really
part
is.
of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting because, you know, we all know that the number of people in the backcountry continues to rise in a big way, but the fatalities hasn't. I'm going to say, you know, besides the patting ourselves on the back, I think that just people in general are way more savvy about it. It's almost like the culture of the backcountry community has changed, and they're, you know, attending webinars like this. They're reading the Avalanche Forecast. They're just taking it more seriously, and there's more resources available now than there were 20 years ago, of course. But I think it's a lot of, in the culture and the attitude of you know, the people that recreate out there.
Yeah, it's Avalanche Education is suddenly cool. And it was amazing last year, like in the United States last year, it was the highest number of fatalities. I mean, it was like 37, I think, last year, which is the highest in like over 10 years. But if you count for like last year, the amount of people out recreating, they think it was double. So considering the number of people doubled, but you know, we only had 37 fatalities. It's like, well, people are making, there's a lot of people making some really good decisions out there.
Right. You
overall.
know, and without sounding like a doomsayer, one of my own personal theories about this flattening of the fatality curve is that, and I think it played out last year in the US, and I think a lot of them were in the Rockies, but even Utah and that area, they didn't have a very stable snowpack. I mean, it was a really tricky year for spending time in the backcountry, and you got to believe that is going to have an impact on fatalities. My own personal theory is that here in Canada, we've been pretty lucky over the last 10 years or so with, I'm not saying that the snowpack is always stable, but I think we haven't seen a really tricky, a really bad year in quite a few years. And I'm not predicting that it's going to happen this year. I certainly hope it doesn't. The forecast is actually quite good for us to get a fair amount of snow. And actually, it's those conditions that typically lead to relatively good years. I know it sounds like, well, the more snow you get, the more avalanches there should be. But what sets up the really tricky avalanche years are when we have less snow. And when there's less snow, there's just a lot more change happening within the snowpack with regards to weak layers, facets, surface cores, you know, just stick around longer. And it's, yeah, it's going to happen at some point here. But we've been pretty lucky, I would say, with a lot of reasonably stable snowpacks that, you know, obviously have their periods of instability, but then, you know, it doesn't last like the whole season. Chris just came up with a question. That's a good question. I like that. Do you see that question, Joe? Please rank in order of effectiveness.
Oh.
For those who are participating, the question is, please rank in order of effectiveness the following tools: inflatable Avipack, Avalon, beacon, and helmet.
I'd say none of them. Say, don't get caught in an avalanche.
I love that answer.
I like it.
None of them work.
I think the brain is number one. Is that what you're saying, Joe?
Yeah, brain, and just don't get caught in an avalanche. It's just not cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice one. All right. Well, yeah, kind of wanted to not let this run over too much. I really want to thank Sage and Vic for their assistance. Yeah, it really made a big difference in terms of Joe and I being able to do our thing, and you guys deal with the logistics. And we're going to get together with Sage and Vic. They had a lot of really good ideas for these questions that we asked you guys, and so we'll kind of use our panel for looking for some really good answers, and as well as, you know, everyone that participated will figure out a random way to pull some names out for some prizes. And I think we'll also get the program Zoom to send you out a survey afterward, and we'll share a few things in that as well. So, Joe.
Yeah, well, thanks a lot, Keith. It was really fun, and everybody's participation, all of the group. It was a big group and lots of great comments coming in. It's been really fun reading through these. It's a really great group. So thank everybody for joining us.
Yeah, and yeah, I really appreciate you and your expertise, Joe, and hopefully we'll get to continue this partnership for many years to come.
Yeah, and all of you, get in touch if you come up to Alaska.
Oh, definitely. You should get in touch with Joe. I've had friends do that already. Okay, well,
Thanks, everybody.
yeah, thank you so much. And hope everyone has a great winter, and we'll hopefully see you out there. I'm going to end
Thanks, guys.
the
And
webinar.
Keith,
Yep.
Since we have recorded this, I'm assuming you'll put a link either on your website or
There you
email.
go. Yeah. Yep. I'm going to try to figure out the technology and make all that happen.
All right.
Sweet. Well, so long for now.